Hi, this is another in our series of oral history interviews for the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting. I'm Cliff Brockman, along with producer Paul Yeager, and our guest today is Charles Munro, professor of journalism at the University of Iowa. Hi, Charles. Thanks for being
Hey,
with
Cliff.
us.
Hey, Cliff. Paul, how you doing?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah. Charles, we're going to you've had a 60-year career. We were talking the other day,
Yeah,
60 years, maybe more. We're going
60
to,
years of 60 years of getting paychecks from people.
okay. We're going to kind of work our way through your career.
Oh God.
But
Okay.
first, I want to go way back to the beginning. Where are you from, Charles,
Well,
originally?
yeah, I'm from California. I grew up in Southern California. Never expected to leave. Owned a surfboard, but early on, I knew I was going to do this. I mean, I used to take implements from my mother's silverware that looked like microphones, and I'd talk into them. So I was clear that I wanted to do this, and I went all the way through high school. I used to broadcast baseball on reel-to-reel audio tapes. But what got me out of California was when I graduated from college. It was during the Vietnam War, and I made the decision to go in the U.S. Air Force, which I did for 4 years. Fortunately, when I did, they didn't put me in the in the motor pool as you expect, or in the chef school or something. I actually got into an audiovisual service, and that convinced me that this is really the career that I wanted.
Okay. So then from there, you went to Detroit, is that right, to WXYZ?
Right. I should maybe go back a little bit.
Okay.
In my college years, I was the news director. My degree was from the University of Southern California, and in those years, the department I was in was called telecommunications. So I was really studying or directing myself to just do TV production. It was a New Year's Day, and I was sitting in my father's office on Colorado Boulevard in Pasadena. He worked for the Pasadena Star News, and I remember early in the morning going in and hearing the clatter of teletype machines and smelling ink. And if those two senses came back to me, I could close my eyes, I would be back on Colorado Boulevard. They were so strong and so motivating that I ended up not just going to production, I really wanted to focus on news. I liked the idea of news, it was exciting to me, as was broadcasting, which was relatively less popular at the time. But when I left the Air Force, I felt that I had the production, and I also felt that from the university, I had the sense of news, and from that incident in Pasadena, California. So at that point, decided I really wanted to go into television news, and rest is history. That's exactly what I did.
Yeah. So you went to Detroit. That's
Yeah.
kind of a large market to start in. How did that come about?
Well, I actually left the Air Force and went to England, London, England. My wife and baby and I went over to London because I had the GI Bill. And I thought, well, maybe someday I might want to teach. So I entered a master's program over in London, University of London, and also University of Southern California. And because the government was paying for it, that's what I did. When I came back, I had no job. I came back to California, had no idea what I was going to do, had no money. Um, and I had an old buddy from USC who said, look, he said, Charles, what you ought to do is you ought to call this particular guy at KABC, which is the television station, of course, in Los Angeles. And I know he's looking for a news writer or something. So I did. I called him, and he said, well, he said, I'll tell you what, I am, but I'm not looking here. I happen to be at KBC today because I'm here moving to Detroit, and the job is open in Detroit, and it's for a trainee news writer. And I said, I'll take it. He said, well, let me look at some of your copy. He said, that's all right. We can work with it. And so I piled the wife and daughter in a car, and we drove to Detroit, Michigan. And that's
Oh,
what
my. Wow. That's a pretty good story.
well, it's a true story.
Yeah.
It was not exactly where I wanted to go, And, for $230 a week, it's the best I could find. I figured I'd need to start somewhere. And so we bought a house. I think it was $24,000 for the house. Very primitive kind of house, but we started our lives there. And at WXYZ, I became not only a writer and executive producer, then on to being the assistant news director in New York City, which was an ABC station after Detroit.
Let's go back to Detroit. You were a producer there then?
I was a producer, executive producer. I probably produced 1,000 newscasts I was there 8 years. And it was a really, I think if I were to think back at that moment when I heard the word Detroit, I thought, absolutely, there's no way. I'm a California guy. There's absolutely no way. It was cold. I never regret it. It was the smartest move I've ever made in my career, because in news, everything that was happening in the country was happening in Detroit. Police, community relations, race, housing, you name it. It was all there, and we covered it. And at that time, I suspect it's probably still true, but at that time, WXYZ was just a leading news station, well-sourced, big staff, biggest ratings, and it was just a real, not only an honor, but a thrill to be able to do that. And I loved producing. I started by doing the early and late news both, plus doing the weekends and the mornings, until I ended up just doing the main newscasts at 6 o'clock.
Oh. And then you were in New York City as assistant news director, is that right?
Yeah, I moved to New York to be the assistant news director, a job that was totally undefined. So it's kind of go there and make something of it. I think what I felt was the experience that I had was very good, but this was a different level. I didn't have much contact with the programs. I was a level removed, and so I had to manage the people who were working on the programs. And so it wasn't exactly the same experience, but it did learn a lot about management, did learn a lot about people, particularly in New York, which was very difficult, heavily unionized. Everybody thought they were the top of their game, even if they weren't. A lot of egos, but it was good because that gave me the grounding in the business to then move on, because I wanted to be a news director, and that wasn't going to happen in New York for any number of reasons. I just had this thing, it's sort of the ultimate job for somebody who's had my experience. So I took a job in Cincinnati, Ohio, at the Scripps Howard station, and that's where I moved after New York.
Now, from there, you went to, before we go on, were there any memorable stories while you were in any of those stations, anything big breaking news? You mentioned in Detroit there were some different race riots and that sort of thing.
Yeah, there are any number of stories, but I'll tell you one. When I was first there in Detroit, I was pretty new, and I thought it'd be a good idea for me to go out with one of the, we used to call camera crews, and they used to have not just one person, but multiple people go out and shoot stories. And there was a story that came in about a terrible shooting that was ongoing. A hostage was shooting at the police. The police were surrounding this building, this house. And so they said, let's roll. And I got in the car and went with the reporter and with the videographer. And we arrived at the scene. Here are all the police around. And I thought, this is a good story. I wonder how this is going to come out. And of course, the police said, get down. This guy has a gun and he's shooting. Get far enough back. At that moment, we're bang, bang, bang. And that's it. I'm going to dive underneath the news car. I'm not getting in the way of this. And I hear bang, bang, bang. All of a sudden, oh my God, my leg hurt. I thought, I have been hit. My God, I yelled at the photographer, I've been hit. He said, no, your leg is up against the exhaust pipe. I didn't go out anymore. Really.
Good story. Good story. Well, was it after that then that you ended up at Magid and Associates?
Well, there was Cincinnati. I was the news director. My competitor, by the way, in Cincinnati, competing station, the anchor was Jerry Springer. Now, what's interesting about that is Jerry Springer, his story was he's a former mayor of Cincinnati and got into trouble and one thing and another. But he came back. He was the anchor he was actually a very good anchor and a very good newsman. And I often think about, if he had stayed in, how well he would have done in news. But of course, he didn't do news and made millions doing what he did. But he was a really good competitor. The other competitor was Nick Clooney. Nick Clooney was George Clooney's father. He was an entertainer and a singer. He acted like an anchor man. He wasn't, but he was one of those TV guys that would look good and so forth. So again, it was one of those things. I had this really interesting kind of competitive situation trying to take that station back up from where it was. It was once a number 1 station in ratings, fallen off, and so I needed to take it back up. I succeeded to get it back up to a tie first. And then shortly after that, I felt my job was done there. Plus, it was really difficult for my wife. We had 2 kids by the time. We'd moved a lot. She said, "Hey, when are we going to settle down?" And I thought, well, I should probably look for something that isn't quite as fluid as a news director job. And that's when I decided to join Frank Magid in Iowa.
So then you moved to Marion or Cedar Rapids area?
Moved to Cedar Rapids. That was required at the time if you wanted to work the company. And I started out as a news consultant where I'd go to news stations around the country, offer advice based on research. You know how that's kind of the way Magid worked back then. And I traveled around the country. I had a number of clients. It was very interesting. Went to some really interesting places I'd never been to before. Different situations. I was very comfortable sitting talking with news directors. It kind of became what I liked doing, although it was a lot of time away from home. And that was the one downside of it. But I did enjoy the job. And then one day, one of my bosses there came and said, "Look, we're thinking about opening up an office overseas, like in London, and we know you've been there. Would you be interested in working on that?" It took me about a nanosecond to say yes. And without going into all the details, I then moved to London with the family. And for 7-8 years, I was all over the European continent, Asia, Middle East, Scandinavia. And that was probably the most exciting time of my life. Because I was talking with people who were I wasn't like visiting Americans in branch offices. I was talking to real nationals who had stories and culture, and who weren't familiar with, nor would I recommend necessarily the way we would do news in the United States. And we had a lot of good discussions, and then a lot of that branched into consulting in bigger ways with general managers and with officers and companies about plans and ways to expand their commercial operations. So it was very high level work, but mainly it was flying into countries and learning about the culture, many trips to places like Athens or Israel or Jordan or Greece, Sweden, Norway, Malaysia, Singapore. And each of those was a completely different kind of experience. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about cultures. I learned a lot about how people communicate. And I learned a lot of lessons about how people outside the United States have really good ideas that we could probably use here.
You also did some work, didn't you, for the Armed Forces, American Forces? TV.
When I was with Magid, because I'd been in the Air Force, I suggested that maybe we might try to get some business from Armed Forces Television Radio Service, and I had a couple of contacts there, and they were really interested in using research and doing a lot of training with their people all around the world. And so another guy and I took on that project, and yes, I went to a lot of the Air Force bases around the country, around Europe. I remember going to Korea and Panama, and basically sitting with American guys and women who were doing news radio, mainly radio for the armed forces, which was a very big thing with the armed forces, a very big morale thing that they did. And I had the advantage of being able to talk the lingo. I was in the Air Force. I immediately became comfortable with the people I was working with. And those trips were always very, very useful, very good. But it wasn't really interpreting research and planning. It was just mainly training. And so, that kind of ran its course, as you would expect. But it was great fun. And I still kept some contacts even after that. But that was part of my Magid work.
Well, let's go to teaching now. That's where you and I get to know each other. I think I might have mentioned we started at the same time, our teaching careers at the same time, 2003, I think it was, at the University of Iowa Journalism School. We were both adjuncts at that time. And why did you decide to go to teaching? I know why I decided, but why did you decide?
It was never my intent to go into teaching. I just knew that way back there when I decided to get that master's degree, I thought it might help me if I decided to do this. But when I thought about all the teaching I did when I was visiting clients at TV stations in the U.S. and around the world, a lot of time spent with news staffs, reporters and anchors and producers. And I realized that I was doing a lot of teaching. And it seemed to be pretty good. And I kind of enjoyed doing it. But honestly, by the time I got to the University of Iowa, I was far along enough in my career and in my age that I wasn't looking for anything long term. I just wanted to get through so that I could retire, at retirement age and so forth. But it really clicked, and I'm retiring this year after 23 years, which means that the students in my classroom right now weren't born when I started. But it has been the most enjoyable and rewarding part of my entire career. I've found, and you may have felt this as the same, Cliff, working with really bright undergraduates is a pleasure. It can be nerve-wracking sometimes. They can get crazy sometimes. But when they perform and when they graduate with great appreciation, is very, very, it's just a very nice feeling that I've enjoyed. And I'm gonna miss it, but time to do something else.
Well, I'd have to agree with you. People ask me what was my favorite job out of all the news jobs I had, because I had a long career, and it's the same as you, teaching. That's always my favorite, and I really do miss that. I'm sure you're going to miss it too.
Yeah. I should say I'm going to stick around. They've asked me to go back to being an adjunct, just teaching the one class, the broadcast class, and then I also coach the television newscast, the daily live newscast that students do. And they've asked me to stick on doing that. And that's worked really well. I've enjoyed that a lot. And the students are really good. They've won a lot of awards. And I think it's a good group. And they do a good job. So I'll continue to do that. I'll coach and advise them. And I'll just adjunct to one broadcast class.
So you're not really going to retire?
Not entirely, no. I got to put in a little bit. But it's just one class in the fall. And in the spring, who knows where I'll go. still a couple of, I've hit almost all my bucket lists. I went to India last year. I said I checked that off, but still have a couple I need to do.
Well, we're talking about teaching. There's one thing, one assignment that always sticks out with any of your students that I have talked to in the past, and that's this mock disaster kind of scenario you do. Tell us about that and how that works.
Well, yeah, I do one class where a couple of people who work with me and I become characters in a story that the students have to solve, have to find out. And so we give them certain clues, we give them video clues, and we become characters. I'm quite often, I'm a sheriff, and we have a truck driver, and we have a hippie, and the one, Angie Looney, I don't know if you know her. She's great. And it's a fairly complex scenario, but the students are divided into teams, and they compete to see who gets the farthest, who gets the story, and the winner gets the silver scoop. Hang on, I gotta show you this. This is the award. This is the award they get.
Okay.
The silver scoop.
Silver scoop. Love it. I love it.
So they can carry that around. It's great fun. But what is interesting is that during this day-long or half-day-long exercise, the students have to run around and go to various places that we give them and put the clues together. And we give them a lot of stuff that is wrong. And we do a lot of politically incorrect talk, which is fun. I mean, it's the one time I can call a female college student honey because I'm in character. But it is probably the best part of the exercise is that it is intense. And when the students get intense and get competitive, they really, I think, feel what it's like to be in the business. And I do that every semester that I teach. And then people carry around the silver scoop and they, say, we got this. And it's a big deal.
Another video I just saw the other day where they were doing some kind of tour of your office. And and you pointed out something about a Chinese student or a Chinese internship you developed through a student. What was that?
We had a very bright international student from China, graduate student. But she was taking my undergraduate class in broadcast. I don't normally recommend that for international students, particularly from China, because the cultures are different and the way they cover things are different. But she was intent on learning and very, very bright. And she finished the class. She continued her studies. And one day I got to talking about a couple of other Chinese students from China who were here studying, who were interested in going to broadcast. And I said, Cynthia Feng was her name. And I said, Cynthia, is there any opportunity over in Beijing at CCTV maybe where they could get a job at, it's a big broadcast, not just state-run broadcast company, but they do a lot of news. They do a lot of news in the provinces. And she says, I'm going back this summer and I'll try to find out. Well, she did. She talked to some people and they said, yeah, we would be open to having a couple of students, Chinese students who speak English for the American service, for the English language service that we do. So she said, I think we can get these internships. And I said, okay, to the students, if you want to go to China, to Beijing and be an intern, you got to apply right here with me. And I thought, imagine that. If you wanted to get a internship at Television China, you had to do it at Iowa. I thought that was a great victory for me.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. Let me ask you kind of a more serious, well, I don't know, more serious, but just about anybody can be a journalist these days or call themselves a journalist if they've got a microphone and a connection to the internet.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's too bad. We don't have a bar exam for journalism. We don't, anybody can do it. I think, Cliff, this all goes with the evolution of the term journalism. I think for a lot of people who got into business when I got in, it was pretty clear you were professionally employed, you had standards, you had ethics, a certain set of standards and ethics. But now there are organizations that, well, some of the big ones like Google and Microsoft that aggregate news. There's no editorial thinking behind them. And then there are those who have an editorial point of view and they aggregate news for that editorial point of view, which confuses people. And so what's happened is we become dependent on those news sources and those journalists who tend to be the ones that we agree with. And we don't hear much about those that we don't. So I think journalism has lost its luster. I think it's lost its professional standing. I still happen to believe, however, that in the end, people still need information. And they still need information that's factually based. I think as long as that happens, I think there will be journalists who work in that environment and who report in that environment. Are still going to be around. I still think there's a future for those. I will also say that in local television news, there's much less of this bias that you hear on networks or on cable news. And if you recall, all of the studies say that most Americans get their news from local TV. So they still trust it. They still see the people on it. We turn out students who go into local TV, and we school them on the ethics and the procedures and the laws. So they, at least the ones I have contact with, they go into local TV, and that's where most people watch their news. So I'm still very optimistic that in the end, if it comes down to it, people will say, I really kind of do need to know, sort of factually based, what's going on. But yeah, anybody who's out there, microphone saying they're a journalist and trying to barge into police stations and news conferences and things, and it kind of insults us all. But there you go. Mm-hmm.
Charles, you've told us what your plans are in terms of retirement. What do you hope that your legacy will be? What do you hope people will remember about you?
Well, I mean, it goes way back to when I started, way back there in the kitchen with my mother's utensils. I think people have to understand and respect communication. Communication between people that has to do with delivering facts, with covering the highs and lows, the emotions that people feel. I personally got into this and still am in it because I'm fascinated by people's behavior. And I've just felt that for me, my contribution was to add to that, to put my little piece into that, to have covered something that is emotional or happy or sad, that in some way enlightens or enriches people. I think that just in terms of my career. And then lately, I would say I would love my legacy to be, well, he was a pretty good teacher. He helped us. He created life lessons for us. And if that is the case, that makes me very happy.
Great. Well, Charles, you've had quite a career, 60 plus years. So just want to thank you for taking time here to speak to us today. I know you've got another meeting coming up you've got to get to. The bane of all professors' meetings, right?
Yeah, it's a student meeting, and I make time for the students.
Oh, a student meeting. Okay. Well, that's all right. Well, thanks again for talking to us.
Thank you. Thanks, Rudy. This has been fun. Thank you.
Yeah.
To Paul.
I'm Cliff Brockman. Paul Yeager is our producer. Thank you, Paul, for helping us out today. And this has been an oral history interview for the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting.